This church stands as a triple memorial. A memorial to God, the priest, and the people who built, supported, and attended it. The chapel of Our Lady of Pompeii was built to fulfill a promise made by Father Mercier. When the United States entered World War I, he was in Italy and had little hope of getting back to America. So he made a promise to Our Lady of Pompeii that if he returned, he would build a church in her name. Mother Rose Lathrop, daughter of the famous Nathaniel Hawthorne, bought the lots of which the chapel was built for $400 and gave them to Father Mercier. Little by little, the chapel was put together. The masons hauled stone from the quarry at the north end of the Madison Street. The beams arrived and were set up. Finally, in the spring of 1918, you can imagine the community joy when the chapel was finished and dedicated to Our Lady of Pompeii. Father Mercier offered the Mass in celebration. The people had their own church to be proud of, and thus the promise of Alexander Mercier, a founder, a father, and a friend, was fulfilled. In 1922, the bell tower was added to the chapel. In 1925, the hall was built for classes in religious instruction. In 1928, Father Mercier died visiting his home in France. In 1929, Our Lady of Pompeii became a mission church of Holy Innocents.
The Dominican order of priests were expelled from France for a time. And one of the priests who came over here, his name was Father Alexander. And since he came from France and spoke many languages, he eventually came up here where the children all spoke Italian or dialect from southern Italy, and befriended the parents, the children, and he would come regularly. And the children would know what time he was coming, and they'd run to the top of the hill here on Garrigan Avenue. And as he came up the hill, they all gathered waiting for him as though he was Santa Claus. And he didn't bring gifts or anything. He sat with the children, told them Bible stories. And within a short period, he spoke to the parents, and they all agreed that they needed a church here. We had the quarry in Thornwood, where the town center is now. All the men worked as laborers, carpenters. They were all in the trades. So when they came home from work, if there was still daylight out there, they started working on the church. The children would come home from school, bring their wagons, boxes, whatever they could, down to the quarry, which wasn't far, and the owner would give them the stone that they could use. So when their fathers got out of work, the stone was already piled and everything was set to go.
The people who built this were Sicilians, and they were from that area and had devotion to Our Lady of Pompeii and named the chapel for her.
Initially, the people who settled in this area were Italian immigrants. They came here, a lot of the men were stonemasons. They worked on the Kensico Dam, moved into this area, and did not feel very welcome in the larger community. They didn't speak English. Holy Innocents was essentially an Irish church at that point, and they didn't really feel very well. They didn't feel part of that community. So they built their own chapel, and this was theirs.
The people wanted someone who spoke Italian or spoke a dialect for confessions before the holidays, for Mass before the holidays. So the church in White Plains, Our Lady of Mount Carmel, was contacted, and an Italian priest came, and he would say Mass and hear confessions in Italian.
So the church became a linchpin to bring all these different ethnic groups together so that they could coalesce into, quote unquote, the Italians in the flats. This little chapel, as little as it is, was a huge, huge, huge part of everybody's life in this area.
We had many organizations here. There was the Mount Carmel Guild, made up of older women, I would say 40s, 50s. The Children of Mary were teenagers. the St. Joseph's Guild. They were all tradesmen.
The St. Joseph Guild, I remember, is that they had, when Mother's Day came, they used to cook breakfast.
Yeah.
And they did a wonderful job. And every Mother's Day, they would do that until the club disbanded.
Years ago, we had our annual procession, which was for Our Lady of Mount Carmel.
In July for Mount Carmel, we used to have the procession, and people would pin money on the statue.
I came in here and there was a statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary and it had $5 bills pinned all over it. I had never seen such a thing in my life except in Italian films, you know. Well, that's a tradition they have.
First we were carrying the statue, then we put wheels on the table, and we wheeled it. And the last time we did it, we went up from here up to through Sunnyside, which the people up there didn't know anything about the Mount Carmel, what you're supposed to do with it. They thought it was a parade, and they clapped when the statue walked by. And that was the last time we had a procession.
Then after the procession, then there would be a bazaar where they would have food and they would have games.
Mrs. Bertay, she used to cook up little breads, rolling. She used to give them to all the parishioners who came to church. Nice, fresh Italian bread. We used to have a little bazaar here. We used to close the street up, you know.
My father helped when they built the church. He was a blacksmith, stained the pews, fixed the kneelers, put new kneelers in.
I spent many a day here with my aunts and my mother, either cleaning the church, setting up the nativity scene for Christmas.
I would come on Saturdays with my grandmother and we would clean the church. We would dust. I would have to dust the pews. We would dust all the statues. That we would water the plants. And then we would go in the back in the sacristy and we would take all of the cloths, the altar cloths, and the little towels that they use, and we would bring them back to her house and we would launder them.
The railings, my brother made the railings, my late brother, in the back.
The pulpit my husband built in memory of my son, who 29 years ago, at the age of 24, was killed in a tragic car accident. And there's always a special place in my heart for this church, Our Lady of Pompeii. My son Carl, as an Eagle Scout project, made boxes, flower boxes for the front of the church, and made a gravel walkway from the entrance of the church to the social hall. But of course that's long gone now. And even at one time, Carl and Mark helped paint the inside of the church.
I used to work up in Chappaqua, and they had a chapel there, and it came the day when they were going to sell this place. So I asked the caretaker up there if the new buyers were going to destroy or take the altar away because it was so beautiful, it was marble. And he said, oh, he said, yeah, they don't want it. I said, well, do you think our church only has a wooden one? Do you think that we could donate or give it to them? He says, oh, absolutely. I've always said I was instrumental in getting this nice altar here.
The Children of Mary, we were pretty much responsible for cleaning up the church before the holidays.
The St. Joseph's Guild, every 2 years, painted this church on Washington's birthday. The paint was donated by Klinger Hardware in Thornwood. And we all painted the church in one day. $10 a month, take care of the church, outside, cut the grass, do this and that, make sure the heat was on for Mass at 8 o'clock in the morning. That meant 12 o'clock at night, you go down to the creepy cellar, bank the stove, bank the furnace, and then it'd be ready for 8 o'clock in the morning.
It was a nice community, and there were a lot of people my age, so we all kind of hung out together in school as well as after school here in the neighborhood. And And it was just you could go outside. You never locked your door. You know, everybody knew everybody. You knew everybody's parents. So it was just a fun little neighborhood to grow up in.
I grew up in this community, just on Lenox Avenue. And at the time when I was a youngster in this town, it was a little different than it is now. Everybody knew each other. If you did something wrong, it was well broadcast out throughout the whole neighborhood and the village. We knew all the policemen. We knew most of the clergy from other denominations. And of course, everyone in this neighborhood kept an eye on everybody. It was like having Big Brother in the female version multiplied by 500.
Throughout my childhood, this was my parish, and Our Lady of Pompeii was the church that I attended. I just lived around the corner from here, so this was my home church.
I was a parishioner from when I was born, 1953 to about 1977 when I moved to Terrytown, and it was an absolutely fabulous experience. It's the church of the flats, really, that, you know, we had like our own private church almost.
My sons, both of them being altar boys here for many years. As a matter of fact, my son, Carl, went through high school as a server.
I was an altar boy for about 6 years. Again, a great experience. You know, from about 8 years old to about 13 or 14.
Father Sullivan would occasionally allow the altar boys to do the readings at Mass. And so that was a very big privilege if you were, you know, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, to be asked to come up and do the reading.
At the end of Sunday Mass, the little old Italian ladies would congregate at the outside of this building and stand on the stairs and the sidewalk in front of the doors, and you could not leave.
It's a very small group of what I call the regulars. They have their special seat where they sit, and I could look out and take attendance like that because we all know each other. And I can talk to people as I'm talking to you.
I was 14 years old when I came here. The previous organist, for whatever reason, had left. There was no choir. And I used to fill in sometimes at Holy Innocents. I would play for benediction. I would play for things at Holy Innocents. And the organist up there said, you know, they have no music at Pompeii. Why don't you go down and see if we can get something started? And it was really a magical moment.
The pews were all the way to the walls on the church, and the altar was not here. The altar was in the back behind me facing the crucifix, and the priest had his back to you. So that was the difference. And then there was a railing that went across the front of the church.
I've been here from the time when the Mass was in Latin till it switched over to English. There have been a couple of different translations of the Mass in English. I've been here through a number of different priests. So there have been a lot of changes that have taken place since I've been coming here, and I think all of those changes have affected my life. Certainly it's affected my music. When I first came down here as music director, everything was in Latin. So we had an entire canon of Latin music, and then that switched overnight, and we've developed a whole canon of English music since then.
We do funerals here now and weddings. My predecessors didn't do that because of the size of the place. And I tell people, as long as it's not going to be a big funeral or a big wedding, we certainly can accommodate it here. And it's very nice because it is intimate.
I think, honestly, my fondest memory is when I can talk to people. We just have a conversation. That it's a human thing. It's a relational thing, and that's what the church needs to be about. It's the body of Christ, people relating with one another.
Christmas and Easter, those are our big celebrations, and that's when, you know, things are most festive and beautiful, and that I think I would cite Christmas and Easter as those most special occasions.
Probably my fondest memory in the church was the first midnight Mass we had here. As I say, there had not been a choir here for a number of years. It snowed like crazy that day. We weren't even sure that the roads were going to be cleared so that we would even be able to have midnight Mass. But one of the choir members, Paul Bruno, worked for the town. He made sure that the roads were plowed around here. And we were able to have midnight Mass, and we had I mean, people had to walk a lot because we were pretty well snowed in. The church was packed. We sang the Mass in Latin. And it's something that will always stand out in my memory. And I think, well, it's something that the people in the church for years and years, I remember our first midnight mass.
When I put those two signs in front of the church to welcome people of other cultures, of other languages, especially in the environment in which we now live, in which many people are meant to feel unwelcome. We live in an anti-immigrant atmosphere. This little chapel stands as a memorial to the efforts and the love of bringing new people into our country, into our community, and we should always have the door open.
I would say probably they feel like when they come in here, they're sitting in a giant hand. It's very comfortable. Now the pews are certainly not comfortable. That's something like out of the Spanish Inquisition. They're wooden and they're hard and they're little, they're tiny, and people are much bigger now than they were 100 years ago, but people feel comfortable.
I think just the fact that this chapel is still here and still functioning for 100 years says a lot. I think that speaks to the dedication of the people and the fact that it still has a vital role to play in this community.
Pompeii has served the Italian immigrant community in this part of Pleasantville for now 100 years. It's a little gem, and I always enjoyed coming here.
And the atmosphere is always good here. There's always people that we know. It's always been like home for us.
The experience has been heartwarming, welcoming, and the priests have been fabulous throughout the years. Being a small parish, I think that it's family here. People come here and they know each other, and they're very caring and understanding.
Everybody was really close together. To work, never had to ask twice. Everybody came together and did it for the church.
The medium becomes the message, how people feel welcomed, whether the preaching has some relationship to their lives, and whether they can form relationships with one another that are supportive and life-giving.
The chapel is thriving in the sense we are full on Sunday. It can't be just a little monument to the past. It has to be something that speaks to the present. And we welcome everybody. We welcome everybody to come back, those that grew up here, those that have moved on to other places, to come back and celebrate with us this year when we celebrate our 100th year. We look forward to another 100 years, if not more.